All right, so for the view pages and the page models, um, if you remember, we scaffolded those. But if we take a look under the hood, you will notice that in the page models that that is C# code, and you will notice link queries that are interacting with the database. So we're going to take a look at a page model. And then we're going to take a look at the corresponding view. The page model is what receives the request. The page model then interfaces with the database or entity framework, I should say, which then interfaces with the database, but it handles retrieving the data. Okay, and then that data gets sent on to the view or the page that the user is looking at. Right? So we will take a look at one of the generated pages. So this is in the user folder. So it's located in our workout app, inside pages, inside users. Okay, that's the namespace and it happens to match the location. And you can see that this is the index model and it is derived from page model, which is why these pages are called page model pages. Okay, in fact, if I pull up my app here and we take a look, it doesn't really matter which code behind we look at. So if you expand out the pages, you will see the code behind. Right? And all of them are derived from page model. Okay, that is why we've referred to them as the page model pages. Okay, so and the job of each one is to handle the user request and retrieve the data or update the database and then route the user to the appropriate location. So we're going to take a little deeper dive into some of this code. And so I kind of pointed out some things that you should note in this little code segment so you understand what is going on. So in line 15, we are creating a private field that stores an instance of workout context. And it is what allows the model to interact with the database. This little section, line 17 through 19, the workout context is injected into the index model class to allow access to the database. So this is what gives us access to the database. Okay, so it's kind of like the constructor, right? Our class is index model. And this is the constructor. Okay, line 22. This is creating a list, a collection that will be storing the user data that we retrieve. Okay, and so we're going to be storing that data in this little user object. Lines 24 through 27 is the actual command. ToList is a link command that basically is going to retrieve the data and store it in a static list. So a lot of the link commands are not executed until you do a for each loop, except for ToList. ToList executes right away. Right? So kind of looking at this starting on line 24, this is going to be asynchronous. Any method that deals with the database is going to be asynchronous, okay? Which means that we're going to have async added on to the end of the method name. Async gets added on to the end of ToList, and then the command, the database command, begins with await. Okay, and we learned that in one of our most recent lessons. Okay, so task is our return data type. And that is part of the system threading tasks that we recently learned about as well. Okay, and it represents an asynchronous operation that is allowed to be placed in a wait state. Okay, it allows the application to run in the background without blocking the main thread. Okay, the let's see, the method itself on get is going to execute with a get request. You'll notice that in all of these page models, on get is associated with get requests, and on post is associated when with submitting a form, okay, upon submission. And this little section here, context.user.toList async, this is retrieving all of the user records, and it's going to store them in our user object over here. Okay, and so this is a link query. So our page model on get methods or on get async, they're either going to show a return type of task like this one, or you'll have task and then in angle brackets, iAction result. Okay, and iAction result can represent a variety of pages that are basically returned to the user. If we take a look at on post async, which we will in a minute, the return data type for that is normally task iAction result. And again, it can return a variety of pages. It can return errors. It can return the user to the index page. It can return a page that displays errors. Okay, there's a variety of things it can return. And so we're going to take a look at some of the more common things that iAction result will return. And the most common is a page. Okay? It returns you to one of the Razor pages. Another thing that you will see being called is redirect to page. So if you delete or if you successfully add a record, it will redirect you to the index page. Okay, and so you'll see redirect to page. This is used, and you're not going to see that until we get into the 218 class, but this actually directs you to a different action method. And these little methods that you see inside page models are referred to as action methods. Okay, another thing that can be returned is a not found result. You can return string data. You can, which basically, if you key in a text string, it will display that on the screen. Okay? You can return files. You can return JSON objects. Pretty much with what we're dealing with, you're mainly going to see page, redirect to page, or not found. Okay? Those are the primary ones. So behind the scenes, we have the page model pages, right? What the user is interacting with is the view. And kind of the main view, the mother view, if you if you want to call it that, is the layout. Uh, the layout is part of every page that the user sees. Um, this layout contains your menu. It contains the structural HTML code. The view itself is pulled in at this point. Okay, so all of those individual views, the create view, the delete view, the edit view, the code that's in them is pulled in at this location. Okay, so every single page that you see is going to include all of this code. And so this should look pretty familiar to you. Uh, if you've had the 180 class, which I hope you have, because this very first tag is for HTML5. Okay? And then we get into HTML as the language, and we split off into the head section and the body section. The head section, you'll notice that we have a meta tag or viewport, which is what we have for responsive pages. We are going to be pulling the title from the different views and displaying it here. And we'll see how that works in a second. And then you'll notice we have a bunch of style sheets, and we do use Bootstrap. So we pull in that library. Site CSS is CSS that you can modify. And then if you wanted to create some of your own in a separate style sheet, you can do that as well. But we're pretty much going to be modifying site CSS. Then we get into the body, which has the header. And inside the header, this is all about the navigation bar. And then below that, we have a division, which has a Bootstrap container class. And then inside that is the main tag. And this is basically where all of your pages are going to go, as I said earlier. You'll notice that there is a class here, and this class is adding padding. And the padding in Bootstrap has numbers next to it. Now, could you put in an inline style for padding? Yes. But any inline style that you put in, if you want to override the Bootstrap, it has to go after the Bootstrap. Okay, so just kind of an FYI. We're going to start up here with the navigation class, and then we're going to kind of move down. And so I'm going to switch over to my actual app. Put this over here. And the layout is under shared. So this is not going to look any different. I'm going to close this than what you just saw. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this header section. So the nav bar class has to be in every Bootstrap class that is going to use a navigation bar. Okay, so you don't really get away from that. And let's see. Navbar expand small is mobile friendly, but it also works on the larger screens as well. And what happens on a smaller screen is instead of seeing the menu bar across the top, you see like a little hamburger, which is 3 lines that you click on, and then the menu displays. This makes the menu toggleable, which means that uh, if you have the hamburger and you've clicked on it to display the menu, you can click to collapse it again. This deals with the color. Navbar light uses light colored text uh, for better contrast. And if there's different ones that you can use, but it's basically designed for contrast against light or dark backgrounds. There's Navbar dark, there's like a high contrast. There's a lot of different settings. And the neat thing about Visual Studio, because we've got Bootstrap kind of built in here, is that you can actually start keying some of these commands in, and then it shows you what your options are. So the minute I do navbar dash, you can see I've got this. Here's dark. Okay. And there is a way to override some of these. So we'll be looking at that a little bit later because we are going to customize our navbar. BG white is a white background. And then this just puts a border on the bottom, puts a shadow on it. And the MB3 adds a margin of 3 units for spacing below the navbar. Okay. And we'll take a deeper dive into all of these Bootstrap commands when we get into the hands-on, which is going to be actually styling them. Okay. So at this point, we're going to move on and take a look at our different pages because we've looked at our page models. And now we want to look at the code that they interact with. And just keep in mind that all of the code that we're going to be looking at is pulled into layout at this point. So we will take a look at the index view, and this goes with that page model that we were just looking at. Okay, so looking at our index view, at page at the top, anything that begins with an @ sign is Razor page code. An @ page means that this is a Razor page. Okay. @ model is going to bind our model class with our page. So it connects them. Okay. And it allows the Razor page to use the properties that we have in our model class. And if our model class included methods, internal methods to the class, we could use those as well. Lines 4 through 6. If you remember, I said over here that it's going to pull in the title and display it up here. And this is where it's getting it from. So whatever text you have defined here is going to end up in the title tags and be displayed in the tab of your web browser. Okay, and then below that is where the HTML starts, but you'll notice mixed in with the HTML that we do have some kind of funky code that you are not used to seeing. So we've got a little attribute here, ASP page. And this is called a helper. It's a tag helper. So looking at this tag, this is an anchor. An anchor should be a link, but we're missing the href. What this does is it generates the href to the create view. Okay? And we are working within users. So we're on the index page for users. So this is going to create a link to this create page. Okay, and this is the text it's going to display for that link. Then you look down here, we have a table. We have a heading section and a body section. So you can see in the heading section, we've got a row, one row with a set of TH tags here and a set here. So we've got two columns. Okay, and so we've got some razor code here. This is called an HTML helper. And what this one does, you'll see it says display name for, and then we've got a lambda, and we've got the first user and name. So what it's going to do is it's going to go up to our user model, and it's going to grab either the property name, or if we have a display attribute, it will grab the text from there. And that is what it's going to use for the column heading. Okay, and for here, it's going to do the same thing for email. So go over to users, and it's going to grab this text for the column heading. Okay, and then we get down here, and this is the body. And for the body, it needs to display every row in the user table. And that data was gathered in the page model. Okay? Every row of data in the user table is stored here. Okay? And we're pulling that in up here. So we can iterate through that data using a for each. Model.user is the data that we are going to iterate through. And we're giving it an alias of item. Okay, and we need two columns. So you'll notice we have two sets of TDs. We have a third one for links. And so in the first one, got our little lambda here, and we've got a HTML helper, display for. Different than display name for. What display for does is instead of grabbing the property name, it grabs the data instead and displays it. So it's going to display the first row of data, the name. And here in the first row of data, it will display the email. Okay, and then it'll go to the second row, the third row. At the end of each row, it's generating links. Okay, so here is our anchor again. This is going to generate the href. This is going to pass along the ID. Okay, and so it's another tag helper. And in order for the edit, the details, and the delete to work, we have to have an ID. Those pages require it because instead of displaying everything, they're only going to display one. So this is going to take, if I run this again, just so you guys can see the page. What it's going to do is it's going to take the ID from the row that I select and pass it along. So this is users. Okay, and you can't see the ID. Okay, that is something that we've hidden. But if I go into details, in order for it to display the details of this particular record, it has to have the ID. So if I click details and we look up on the URL, you can see it passed along an ID of 1. Okay. Now you might be thinking, well, could we bring up other details by keying in ID numbers? Yep, I can key in ID 3 and bring up that data. I can key in ID 4 and bring up that data. But the bottom line is it has to have an ID. Delete needs one, details needs one, and edit needs one. So that ID has to be passed along, and that's what this is doing. So the one thing that confuses people, I'm going to close this out, when they get into the views is that there's all these occurrences of model, and some are lowercase and some are uppercase, and what the heck do they all mean? So I did outline that for you right here. Okay, and so I even kind of summarized it down here so that you would be able to follow what is going on. Okay, so the capital M model refers to the index model class, the instance of that class. Model, capital M user, is a list of user objects. Lowercase model. It is a placeholder parameter used inside HTML display name 4, and it is used to represent model. Okay? Just like when we were doing lambdas and we had to come up with a placeholder or a variable to use in the lambda, that is what the purpose of model is here. Okay? But anytime you see a capital M, you're actually getting at the data. These lower M models, again, are just placeholders. Here, we are getting at the data because item is our alias for model.users. So hopefully if you guys get confused, you can kind of take a look at this. I've also got it explained up here. So kind of two different ways. And you'll understand what is going on. So we're going to quick take a look at some additional views. And I did put them side by side in here because I think it's helpful to look at them that way. Okay? Because your page model feeds the view. Okay? So if you look at them side by side, you can kind of see how they are related. In your application, because this is the details one, where they are is here's your detail view, and then here's the page model. Okay, and so I just kind of pulled them out and did them side by side for you. So the details view, its job is to display 1. Whatever ID it receives, it's going to display the information for that particular, in this case, user. Okay, so what you see at the top here is the same, because we've got our private context variable, and then we're kind of injecting it here into our page model. We've got our little constructor. We are creating a user object here. You'll notice it's not a list, it's just 1. And that is to hold the data for the user that we want to see. And then we have onGet. Okay? And you'll also notice that now instead of returning task, it's got task iActionResult, because if we look at the return statements, it can return not found, it can return a page, or down here it can return not found. And so it can return more than one thing, and that's why you have iActionResult. Okay? And we're interfacing with the data, which is why we have async and await. Okay, so this is on get async. And we should be bringing in an ID, but we did make it nullable. Obviously, if ID is null, we got an issue and it's going to return not found. Okay, but we don't want a null ID to break our application. So, um, and when a Razor page application is broken, instead of getting a not found page, you get a database error that looks very interesting. So we don't want the thing to break. Uh, so making it nullable will avoid breaking this. Uh, Immediately, we check to see if ID is null, because if it is, we can't find the page if it's null. Okay, and then we have our link query, where we're going to look for the first occurrence of that ID. So first or default is what we're using here, and we add async to the end because we're doing an asynchronous operation. Okay, and then you'll notice that it's checking for it's going to check, it's going to retrieve every single row, and it's going to check the ID in the row against the ID that it received, that was passed to it. And then when they match, it will store the data in user. Okay. So it is conceivable it could go through the whole thing and not find a match. Okay. Or it could go through, and the minute it finds the first match, it's done. It'll save the data and move on. Okay, which is why after we do that, we check to see if the user is not null. If the user is not null, that means we got some data. Okay, and so we take this little user object that we created and we put it into user, which is our object here. And this is what our view page has access to. Okay, and then we return page, which is going to take the control over here. Okay, now that'll all happen if user is not null. If we went through the entire database and it did not find a match, then it's going to return not found. Okay, but we're going to assume that it found a match. So we come over here, and we've already talked about what this code at the top does. Okay, so what is new? Looking down here, H1, we've got a div, we've got an H4. We have a data list. So that is how the details view is being displayed. Let me see if I still have this running. I may have turned it off. Here, I will show you. If you remember from HTML, we actually used the data list to display a recipe. But here, it is being used to display this. So we have our data list, and the class is set to row. Bootstrap uses a responsive grid, and within the grid, you have to define things in rows, and within rows, you have columns. So it's kind of like our grid view layout. The columns have to equal 12 for a single row. So looking at this, we've got the username, column 2 and 10. So that equals 12. So that's one row. And then we've got the user email, 2 and 10. That is our second row. Okay, here's display name 4. So it's going to retrieve the property name and display it. And then here it's display 4. So it's going to retrieve the data. And you can see that is exactly what it did. Okay, so that's the 2. This is the 10. Okay, for email, it does the same thing. Display name 4. And then for the other one, it retrieves the actual data. Okay. And then at the very bottom, we've got the links to edit, and then the one that'll take us back to the index. For the edit, because the edit page requires the ID, we are passing that along because it can't edit this without the ID. Because each one of these is self-contained. So what's going to happen if we click on edit is it's going to pass the ID, and then the edit is going to pull in that ID and do the query to look for this particular record. The create page. So the page model, let me show you what this looks like. All right, so this is what we're looking at. Very simple little form here. So the page model, everything else at the top kind of works the same way. You'll notice there's an on get, and we have an on post. On get is not interfacing with the database. It is just going to display the form. So when you click on create, it's going to run through on get because there's nothing to post. So it just goes to the page, the create page, and runs that code to display it. Okay, so here is our create code. So when you first display, it's going to run through this action method, and then it's going to come over and run this code. Okay, and you can see this is, again, displayed in rows. And the data looks like it's in a single column, and it's sized for a mid-range screen at 4. Now, could you have done a smaller screen at 6 or 8 or what? Yeah, but there's only one column here, so that's probably why they chose mid. But there's a lot of different sizing that you can use. The ones that are, well, the one that's most mobile friendly is small. And using a medium like this, with only 4 would also be mobile friendly. So that is just the amount of space that it's giving this little form, vertically or horizontally to display in. So there's quite a bit going on here with helper tags. So you can see we've got our form tag and post, and that'll kick in when we submit. And at the top, we have a tag helper called ASP Validation Summary. And this is going to be displaying error messages. Okay. And so that just tells it to display error messages from the model. And the class text danger, which you will see in all of the places that error messages can display. Text danger makes the text red. Okay, it's a bootstrap class. Okay, and then each of our little form elements is in its own little div. So you can look at it, a little element cocoon with the class of form group. So the name is in its own little form group, and the email is in its little form group. Okay, and so you can see first thing that it's displaying is a little asterisk. That is because it is required. Okay, so we get the little asterisk. And it's a span tag. Span is an inline tag. Okay, and so all we're doing is coloring this little asterisk red. And right next to the little asterisk is the name. Okay, ASP4 user.name. This is a control label. Okay, and then you'll notice between the opening and closing label, there is nothing. Well, what is going on is we've got ASP4 user.name. It's going to go out and grab the property name. And that's why the display attribute is so important, because if you don't want it to use the property name, you can specify a display name and it will use the display name instead. Okay. So this is the label is all about retrieving the text. And then you'll notice we have an input tag. Now we also have ASP4 user.name, but this is actually connecting it to actual data. Okay. And this is a form control, so it's formatted a little differently. You can see how the control is formatted when I activate it, and by default, how it kind of looks. Okay. And then below it is it will display an error message. So if I click create, and I don't fill anything in, that's when you see the text that's formatted here. Okay, a validation for username. And then the class is text danger, so it's going to be red, and it's going to end up displaying between the span tags. Okay, and so it's basically looking at our model to see what the requirements are for name. And let's pull that up so we can remind ourselves what that is. And so we said name was required, and it had a length of 100. Okay. So that's what it's looking at. And then it is retrieving the appropriate message because we didn't fill it in. Email is going to be the same, right? So we've got the little red here next to email. And then it's pulling the text from the class for the little label that's displayed. And then for the input, we're formatting it with the form control, which kind of makes it look like this. And it is connecting directly to what we have specified for that particular column, okay, or property. And so the rules that we have there was that it had to be an email address. Okay, so if we pull that up again, you can see we have email address and required. So if I fill it in and I don't make the email address valid, it'd be like something like this. Now it's showing the email address is not a valid email address. Okay. Now it's switching to say it's required. So it's looking at those rules and it's displaying whichever one is applicable, which is pretty cool. Okay. And then at the very bottom, we have another little group cocoon here for that create button. Anything that you want to use as a button needs a class of button. And then to put the color in, there's a lot of different options. Button primary it creates a blue button. Okay. And we will be changing that to use a color that looks a little bit better with the theme we're going to go with. But you can actually specify your own color by just using the button class and then adding an inline style after with a background color. So you don't have to go with only the Bootstrap colors, which are rather limited. Okay, then down at the bottom, we have that back to list link. We've already kind of described how those work. And then down here, the little script section you will see on the create and edit, and it's actually pulling in validation scripting from jQuery and JavaScript. Edit and create are very, very similar. The difference is the on get. On a create, there is nothing to retrieve, so it just displays the form. With an edit, it's going to receive the ID. So it's pulling in the ID. And so what it's going to be returning then is an iAction result task because it may return page not found. It may return, the page with data. It just depends on if it can find the ID or not. So first thing it does is check for ID. If it's null, it returns page not found. If it's filled in, then this is the exact same command that we saw with details, okay, where it is going to go through all of the rows in the user table. It's going to compare the ID that it received to the ID that is in the table. When it finds the first match, then it stores that data. If it goes through the entire table, does not find a match, user is going to be null, so it's going to return not found. Otherwise, we can take all the data that it retrieved, store it in user, okay, which is our user object that we create. And here you can see that we added a bind property, which is a little different than we did in the create, right? That is because we have data that we're displaying in the form. In the create, we don't display any data, so there's nothing to bind to the model. Here we are displaying data, so we need the data connected to the model class, and that's what bind does. Okay, so we're retrieving the first match. We are storing it in user, which is the object that we created that gets shared with our page, and then we're returning to the page. Okay, so then it comes over here and runs through the code. And so the code is going to look kind of similar to the create. Again, we've got a row for the layout. Within the row, we have a single column. The form method is going to be post for when we submit. Okay? And then it's going to have the same kind of layout here for the labels, for the inputs, and for the error messages. So there's really nothing different here. The only thing that you'll notice a little different is down here where the button is. Instead of create, it has a value of save. Okay, and so how this looks, find it. Let me go back to the list. So this is what we are looking at. Okay, so the difference between this and the create is that we've got the data filled in. Okay, but as far as, how we set this up, it looks the same. But now it is receiving some filled in user data. Okay? And that filled in user data is bound. It is connected to the model so that when we have, user.name in our input, it's actually going to display the data. Okay? Then if we make a change, and I hit save, what happens is, well, now it's not going to go through on get. It's going to go through on post. Okay, because when you save or when you create, you are posting the form. Okay, so what happens there? First thing it does is it checks to see if there's errors. So model state dot is valid. If that is true, the model state is valid. That means there's no errors. This is checking to see if it's not valid, if it's not true. Are there errors? Well, if there's errors, we can't very well save it. So you display the page with the error. So let me mess up my email here. All right, now if I hit save, my model state is not valid. Okay, so what it does is it returns the page and displays the error. Okay, and I got to fix it or I'm not going to be able to save this. Okay, um, so if I get past this, that means I don't have errors. Okay, and so then it actually is changing the state. Entity framework is changing the state of this particular record to indicate that it's been modified. Okay, and that is what this statement is doing. And then the next thing it tries to do is save the changes to the database. This is saying, oh, yeah, I have a row here, a user row that's been modified. It tries to save it. Why is that in a try-catch? In a environment where you could have multiple people accessing a database, somebody could have deleted it. Okay, so you can grab the data for editing, and before you're done, somebody else could grab it and delete it. Okay, that can happen in the real world. So that is why this is in a try-catch. So if I fix this, okay, if I fix this and then I save, what's going to happen is it's going to change the state and it's going to go ahead and save the changes to the database. Nobody else is accessing this, so I don't have to worry about it being deleted, right? Okay, so that's what happens. If it didn't work, it's checking to see if the user ID is there. And if it's not there, if it's not found, we return not found. That means it was deleted. Otherwise, there's some other kind of error, okay, because it should be there. I mean, we just pulled it up and changed it. Okay. And then at the bottom, assuming, everything goes as planned, right? We're able to do the save. Then it redirects us to the index, which is what you saw. Okay, and then down here, user exists, user ID. This is like a private little method that is used internally. Okay, it can only kind of be used in this particular page where it's receiving the ID and it's doing a little query and it's looking for any match on ID and the IDs that are in the table. Okay, so it's saying if that ID isn't there, hey, it's gone. So not found. Okay, so that is how this one is working. Okay, I think the delete is our last one. So we will go through this one. Um, the page model starts out like all the other ones, and we're just dealing with one, so not a collection. So we got our little object here to store one. And this also needs to receive an ID so we know which one needs to be deleted. And if the ID is not filled in, obviously we can't delete anything, so we return not found. Otherwise, it's going to look for the first occurrence, just like it did for the edit and the details. Checks to see if it is not null. Okay, if there was something there, we take the user variable here and we put it in our object and we return to the page over here. And this is going to display that data back to the user. So how that works. I pick delete. I get the data displayed back to me. Okay, so it has run through all of this code, passed that user back over here. Okay, and we're displaying a data list. It is by row, and we've got that 210 configuration again. Okay, so we've got 2 and 10. So it's pulling the property name here and displaying the value here. Okay, and then down at the bottom, we have a little form, and you'll notice that the ID is hidden. We have to pass the ID back if they click delete. We have to pass this ID back over to our page model so it knows which one to remove. Okay, and so we're hiding that. They don't need to see it. Okay, and then the button that they see is called delete. And you can see we have button that formats it like a button, and then the coloring is button danger, which is red, which I normally leave alone because deleting is dangerous. And then you'll notice that we also have a link to go back to the index if they change their mind. Okay, so and I'm not actually going to delete this one, but if I click on delete, what happens? That ID is then passed back over here. And when you submit a form, it is posting the form. Okay? Method is post. So it's going to run through on post. And we are sending it the ID. So ID should not be null. If it's null, we got a problem. So it's going to return not found. So here it does find async. Okay? I just looked at the ID. It should be there, so it should be able to find it. Okay, so it takes that row data and it stores it. And as long as the contents of user is not null, we take the contents and we put it into our object that we created earlier, and we run the link command to remove it. And then we save our changes. Okay, once we're done, it gets redirected back to the index page. So that is what it is doing. And now that you kind of understand, and I should say, all of the CRUD pages work the same. The only difference really is, the amount of properties that the pages have. In ours, exercises has by far the most. Okay, each one of these is a property, so it has a lot more. Okay, but you'll notice that same series of commands in all of the page models and kind of the same formatting method in all of the views. Now, what we're going to do is modify the code to help our users out when they want to create a new exercise. Because when we click on create, we have an enum for type, and it only allows specific types. So if I did cardiovascular here, it's not going to take it. Okay, well, let me put in a junk name. Shouldn't take it. Okay, so it says cardiovascular is not a valid type. So this is very hard for users because they have no idea what's valid or not. So we are going to fix this. And in order to do that, we are going to have to change the code behind, okay, our page model, and then we're going to have to change our view. And so what we're going to be changing in the code behind is we're going to create a little list, okay? And then we are going to fill it with the enum data. Okay, and so this is the command to get the names that are associated with our enum. Okay, and the enum is located at workout, model, and type. Take all those names and put them in a list and store them. Okay, and then that is going to get passed on to the view. And then what the view is going to do is we're actually going to comment out the current code for type, and we are going to add this code. Okay, and so you can see I commented out the current code, and then I added this code. Okay, so it still needs to be in its own little group. Okay, and we have a label, and then we have our select. Okay, the class is form control still, and it's for exercise.type. Okay, you can see exercise.type, class is form control. But then we have an opening option, which says select type. And then this is going to generate all the remaining options from the list that we created in the code behind. Okay, and model.typeList is how we are going to access that. Okay, remember, we called it type list here, and then we throw model in front. And so we're going to refer to each one as type. And so we are just formatting an option tag here. Option value equals at type. Okay, that gives it the value that is required in our HTML. This is what is going to display. Here's our end option. And then we have our end select. And then our validation pretty much stays the same. That has not changed. Okay, so I'm going to add this. And let me get rid of some of all of this extra stuff. All right. So this is under user and create. First, we are going to modify this. And let me pull that up. Where is it? All right, move that to my other screen. So we are going to need to put the list above on get, because it needs this when it displays. So we'll just put property to hold the enum values, and we'll create our little public list. And we'll set it equal to new list string. All right, so now we've got our list, and now we have to populate it before we route to the view. We got type list equals enum dot get names type of workout dot model dot type. Okay, and you may think, well, why didn't you put exercise in there? Well, if you remember, we did not make this part of the exercise class. Okay, it's above our exercise class, and that's why we did not put exercise in the name. Okay, in fact, I will take a quick look. And oops, this should be though. I just put this in the wrong thing. This is what happens when you aren't paying attention. This needs to go into exercises. Create in the code behind. Put that in here. And we will move that into the correct spot as well. There we go. All right, so in the exercises folder, in the page model for create, we have our list that we created, and here is where we're populating that. And if we come up to exercises, as I was saying, here's our exercise class, but the enum is not inside that class. Okay, it is under workout.model, which is why we've got workout.model.type. Okay, let me save all of this. So now we have all of the types that we can access. So let's go to our create view under exercises. And here's the code for type. So let's comment this out. So this is an HTML comment. It's an angle bracket, exclamation dash dash. That's how it starts. And then how it ends is dash dash angle bracket, which I'm actually going to move so that it's after that closing div. So that's what we had. And now we need to create something new. And you could just start with what you have and add to it, which is what I did. And I think I might do that here as well, because it does save you some typing time. Okay, because form group doesn't change. The label control really doesn't have to change either, although we could. I did it a little different, but doesn't really matter. This is going to change. The class is not. So it's not really an input, it is a select that we are creating. The class is form control, that is correct. And this is an ASP for exercise.type. Okay. And I'm going to put in the closing select. Okay. Then in between the opening and closing select, that is where the options need to go. So the first one is really not an option that we want to pick them to pick. We just want to tell them to select the type. Okay. And then after that, we do the for each. Var type in model.type list. And then do our little curly braces, and in between, we're going to format how each of these options is going to look. So we've got value equals. We do a little razor page magic here. And then in between the opening and closing, we want the type displayed. Alrighty, so let's save this and run a build. Oh, yes, we better stop debugging. All right, so once it's done running the build, we are going to go ahead and check to see if this works. So let's run our app. And this was for exercise. And we're going to create one. Okay, so I think we'll do abs. And this is strength. We'll call it abs. We'll do crunches, abdominals. Just do crunches here. Oh, how many crunches do we want to do? We'll do 23 sets. I don't know, 10 minutes. Let's create that. And now it worked. And you can see how much easier that was using the drop down. Now, what we should do is add it here as well. And you just saw the technique we used to add it to the create. You can follow the exact same process to add it to the edit. So adding this to the edit is going to be fairly simple because we've already got the code. So let's go to exercises and edit. We'll do the code behind first. And let's see. Here's our edit model. We've got code in our create. Just going to copy this. I'm going to go over to my edit. Okay, and I don't want to replace everything because this get is a little bit different. Okay. But I do want to add the property and I do need to fill it in. So I think we'll fill it in down here. All right, now let me get rid of that because I'm not going to use that. Okay, so now I've got this set up for the drop-down list as well. So let's go to our edit page. And here's type. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. And then we'll add our new one. And the new one should be pretty similar to what we just did. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my create. In fact, I'm going to double check, but I'm pretty sure that code is exactly the same. So I don't think we have to change a thing. Let's copy this, go into the edit. All right, we're just going to verify here. We've got exercise type, we have a control label, and we've got our form control. Yep, and there are no errors flagging, so I'm pretty certain this is going to work. So save everything. Going to run a build. And yep, we're going to stop debugging. And then let's go ahead and run it. And let's go to exercises. And we need to change one of these. Okay, we'll change yoga. All right, so if we click on flexibility here, now we do have our drop down. We'll change it and save it, and it does in fact work. Okay, so now we have made this a whole lot easier for our users when they create or edit an exercise.